Sephora stores are everywhere you are. So just pop in. When you need a brown lip to match your 90s playlist. A confidence boost before your interview? Or a last-minute gift for mom's birthday. There's always a Sephora near you. Just pop in. Use our store locator to find your local Sephora or Sephora at Kohl's.
This is Michael Warburton. You're listening to Famous and Gravy, Life Lessons from Dead Celebrities. Now for the opening quiz to reveal today's Dead Celebrity.
This person died 2014, age 46. His mother is a former family court judge. His father worked for the Xerox Corporation. His parents divorced when he was young.
That's so young. Okay. Now, of course, I can't think of any dead people. Winston Churchill.
Not Winston Churchill. I think he made it past 46, but a great guess. The New York Times once said, quote, "He does terminal uncertainty better than practically anyone."
That feels like a comedian. Okay, I'm going to say Glenn Rogers.
Not Glenn Rogers. Who's Glenn Rogers?
He's not a comedian. Isn't he like a cowboy? I think he's like a showy cowboy.
Is this a person? I'm going to have to know. You got me wondering who Glenn Rogers is.
Yeah,
not Glenn Rogers.
Okay, yeah.
He was a sleepy-looking man with uncombed hair who favored rumpled clothes.
I do feel like it's a comedian with wild hair, but I don't know his name. He yells a lot. He dogs like this,
Gilbert Gottfried?
Yes, that's who I'm thinking of. Is he alive?
Not Gilbert Gottfried. Okay. He was perhaps the most ambitious and wildly admired American actor of his generation.
Wait, I think I was just talking about him last night. Is this Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Today's dead celebrity is Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Sometimes I'll set things up for myself that I don't know if I'll be able to achieve. Meaning I'll create a crisis, ultimately, with a part I'll take or with a job I'll take. And that's really just a lot of other people say it's a risk because all of a sudden you're in a crisis moment because you have to actually come through with it. And then you're actually going to have the will to actually do it, to actually fail and look like an ass in front of people. You're going to have to actually do that in order to be good. You know, you're going to actually have to go in and start humiliating yourself sometimes right there in front of people in order to get to the good stuff.
Welcome to Famous and Gravy. I'm Michael Osborne.
And I'm Michael Warburton.
And on this show, we're looking for ways to make life better, and we want to know what celebrities can teach us about ourselves. So on each episode, we choose a famous figure. At the end, we answer two questions. 1, would I want that life? And 2, what might this person say to St. Peter at the pearly gates? Today, Philip Seymour Hoffman died 2014, age 46. So before we get started, a quick programming note for regular listeners of our show. My usual co-host Amit Kapoor is away working on a number of side projects, including some very exciting updates for Famous and Gravy. So for this episode and the next few we've got planned, I have lined up an all-star list of guest hosts. Today, I'm joined by my friend Michael Warburton, a seasoned actor living in the UK and someone who, if you are into pop culture history, you have to follow him on Twitter, X, and Threads. That's where he and I first met. Michael Warburton, how you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm excited and scared about this episode because this is a hard episode in some ways. On one hand, young deaths are always hard. But the other thing that I realized is I am still grieving this guy. Like we were talking the other day, the fact that it's been 10 years since he died, it doesn't feel like 10 years.
It really doesn't. It's very, very weird. You know, a lot of my Twitter feed is about legacy, and it's about people and keeping their memory and their work and their craft and their talent alive. And some of them, you know, it feels a while ago. But Philip Seymour Hoffman, it feels like 3 or 4 years. That's what it feels like to me. One of the things, again, you and I have spoken about many times in the past, and it's really interesting to me in terms of Twitter, is the feedback I get on people, films, in terms of the love out there. I end up getting a huge amount of information on what degree of love for what person is out there. And so it's almost like I've ended up with a love poll, if you like, for great artists. And Philip Seymour Hoffman is way up there, way up the top. Top 5, top 3, could be even in the top 2. It's insane.
He doesn't feel dead in a funny way. He doesn't feel dead. And I think that, I don't know. Let's get into it. Okay. Category 1, grading the first line of their obituary. Philip Seymour Hoffman, perhaps the most ambitious and widely admired American actor of his generation, who gave three-dimensional nuance to a wide range of sidekicks, villains, and leading men on screen, and embraced some of the theater's most burdensome roles on Broadway, died on Sunday at an apartment in Greenwich Village he was renting as an office. He was 46. Your initial reaction to the first line of his obituary, Mr. Warburton?
Well, it's kind of like a lot of things to do with Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's heavy. Yeah. It's full of portent. It's full of drama. It's dark. It's got gravitas. Everything around this guy, even his addictions, and again, we'll talk about later, everything's got gravitas with this guy. And I think that's why, or one of the many reasons why, it feels like to do Philip Seymour Hoffman justice, his memory, his work, everything about him, it feels as much of a burden as maybe his life and his career was to him. Yeah. In its own way, if you know what I mean.
I totally do. I mean, just to point out some of the words here, most ambitious, widely admired, three-dimensional nuance. I mean, there's like so much effort to try and capture his greatness. It's almost like they're throwing the frickin' thesaurus at this first line of the obituary. Let me point out something that really struck out to me. Wide range of sidekicks, villains, and leading men. One thing that stands out about the guy is his versatility. He's good guys, he's bad guys, he's the main guy, he's not the main guy, he's a small character, he's a scene stealer, he's a cameo. Like, every time he shows up, he's almost unignorable.
They're throwing the kitchen sink at it, as you say, but I tell you what, I think they know they need to do him justice, and I think they've done a fair job with that opening, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think they're referencing when they say most burdensome roles on Broadway?
I think they're relating, or referring rather, to the fact that this guy had courage. This guy was courageous. This guy, he would take on anything.
You're talking about burdensome here, like why they use the word burdensome?
And he used that, Michael. He used that word quite a lot.
Yeah.
It was a hell of a burden to get to the point of greatness that he knew he had to. That is a hell of a burden. Directors that worked with him, they all talked about the fact they could see the burden that he put upon himself.
Part of my job is actually that it's me. I'm not a painter, I'm not a musician, I'm not these things where I'm creating something that then I can distance myself and you can actually experience it. I'm actually the one. It's me, my body, my head, my mind, my voice. It's right here, and there is something about people criticizing that or failing in that realm, and it's actually you they're talking about. That's hard. That's hard to take, and I do fear that, definitely.
Most burdensome roles, I assume they're referring to Death of a Salesman and probably True West as well. I mean, I don't know the theater as well as you do. And I guess those are roles that are, up there for like, oh, that's a challenging one.
Well, yeah. I mean, anything Arthur Miller's challenging, but, the roles he took on Broadway, there's been some directors who said that with regard to, for instance, Death of a Salesman, it was a classic case of he took it home with him. He lived the part. Every actor's got their own method, but he knew how to get to where he needed to get to, and he was prepared to pay any price for that. Just a quick sidebar. When I was in my 20s, I remember saying to myself, Michael, would you be prepared to pay any price? Would you be prepared to do anything for a character or for a role? And I surprised myself with this internal conversation by saying no. That's changed a little bit over the years. But I think from the get-go, Philip Seymour Hoffman would have been, whatever it takes. Don't care.
So interesting. You asked yourself that question. You had that conversation of like, are you willing to go to any lengths? And that question is not simple, but that's sort of the question that you felt was before you as an actor, and that's before anybody who wants to achieve greatness like Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Well, look, I've said for decades that when you do it right, acting at its best is actually very dangerous because, pardon my Swedish, you're fucking about with your psyche. You're screwing about with your own psychology, your own mental health, sometimes your soul.
Yeah, there's a surrendering.
Yeah.
That is dangerous. That I think we're going to get into it as we go, because I do think that his art and his addiction are really intertwined in complicated, interesting, and mysterious ways. Okay, let's do this. Let's grade the first line of the obituary. I have my score. I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. I think that this is actually kind of perfect. The more I look at this first line of the obituary, the more I love it. I love ambitious. I love three-dimensional nuance. I love the range of roles. I love the nod to theater and Hollywood. They mention, kind of as a side note, that he died in an apartment he was renting as an office. Usually when they have that kind of qualifier at the end of a sentence, it says something tragic and unexpected happened. So this first line of the obituary, frankly, is doing a lot of work for me. I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. I don't have any problems with it.
No, I don't either. I think it's suitably respectful. I think it suitably honors him. 10 out of 10. I think it's an excellent first line.
All right, let's go on. Category 2, 5 things I love about you. Here, Michael and I are going to come up with 5 reasons why we love this person, why we want to be talking about them in the first place. What do you have, Michael?
Well, the first one really is originality, which is really important in art, to push the boundaries, to try and create something new.
It's sort of everything,
I think so. Audiences need to see something new, something original. And he was that. And I think he was original for lots of different reasons. Firstly, courage.
Yeah.
Secondly, his intelligence as an artist. So, for instance, so many of the characters he played were weird, creepy, odd, difficult, repugnant, evil, yada, yada, yada. And a lot of actors, even really good ones, will say, right, that's where I'm going with that. Difficult to get to, and I'll do it really well, but I'll get to that level of evil, repugnant, awful, weird, creepy, whatever. But the great actors, and Philip Seymour Hoffman was absolutely one, what they'll do is add a level of humanity, a level of humility.
Empathy.
Empathize with him, exactly. Because whatever this hideous or appalling, strange character was doing, you were fascinated. And this is another one of the reasons why today is so tough doing Philip Seymour Hoffman, because he's extraordinarily complex, and he brought all that complexity of him and whatever he'd learned in his life thus far to every character that he played. And audiences appreciate that. They so appreciate that.
What I learned was that these people that I was going to play were not me. The thing I had to look at was how were they similar to me and how were they different from me. And I had to cover those bases so I could understand what makes them different and what makes them similar, and therefore I could create this person that's not living my life, it's living someone else's life. And so that's just how I've approached it, and I guess that maybe people call that character acting, but that's just how I approach acting, period.
I got a couple things I want to ask about on this, because I've certainly been thinking about it a lot in terms of like what he did that does seem in that sort of masterclass next level, holy cow, how does anybody ever do this? One, I saw him say a few different places, our job as actors is to defend everyone you play, which means you have to show the ugly side of them, which at first sounds really smart, but then it's like confusing. He would show, these unbelievably vulnerable moments. I think one that sticks in everybody's mind is in Boogie Nights, where he tries to kiss Mark Wahlberg's character and then is beating himself up in the car.
I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. Fucking idiot. Fucking idiot. Fucking idiot.
There was a willingness to go there. If you really look at that quote, our job as actors is to defend everyone you play, which means you have to show the ugly side of them. What's confusing about that is oftentimes when you see the ugly side of somebody, you're turned off, you're repulsed, you're scared, And one thing that he did that I think speaks to that originality is go there, but not lose you. Even in his villains, you're still drawn in, compelled. And I don't necessarily want to say rooting for, but it would be so easy for it to go the wrong direction. And somehow he walked right up to that line where you're still holding empathy for him. And that to me seems like a superpower.
Yeah, it's like he had a permanent umbilical cord connecting him to humanity and vulnerability and all the key elements that would seem diametrically opposed to the character if that character is evil or awful or appalling or creepy or weird. He would not let go of these key attributes. It was always about, look, whatever this person is or isn't, they are still a human being. Our language, when we describe serial killers or the Nazis or whoever, about them being monsters, they're not monsters at all. They're human beings. Really, as an artist, I can't stress enough how courageous he was. I mean, like for instance, as you said with Boogie Nights, he's laying it all out there, and he knows and feels deeply the physical unattractiveness of himself. It's a really unselfish thing to say, I will debase myself for this character, for my personal pursuit of greatness. But that's what I'm going to do as an artist, and I don't give a shit. That's amazing.
That's actually a really good segue to thing number 2 that I had. I said humility. And I think one of the things that's hard about doing this episode is that, Philip Seymour Hoffman was very careful never to reveal much about himself. I can't tell you how many interviews I watched with him where I was just sort of looking to get a little bit of insight beyond his experience as an actor and these wide range of roles he played. And it's hard to find that. Every interview I saw him with very few exceptions, he does look rumpled. He's wearing short sleeve flannels. He's not like fashionable in a way, and he's got a kind of stocky body and, a little on the heavy side. Quick side note on this. He actually looks a lot like my older brother. My brother once told me a story. He had to bust out his wallet and show his driver's license to somebody in an airport to prove to them that he was not Philip Seymour Hoffman. So every time I see him, there's this just unbelievable familiarity. And I think that's my own personal bias. All of this is to say, while I think he was proud of himself and his work, I see some real humility. I was actually really struck by that, how much in conversations and in interviews appeared just incredibly relatable. And so I guess maybe I'm saying humble and relatable. Those things are linked to me, but they really stood out.
Yeah. Well, I like the fact that he didn't give a shit about, what clothes he was wearing, whether he was fashionable, how he looked, because that's the antithesis of vanity, and especially the sort of Hollywood vanity, and especially the sort of Hollywood vanity that normally goes with A-listers, which he was.
Yeah. One thing that's been really interesting to me in getting ready for this episode, we just did an episode on Oliver Sacks, the neuroscientist who, in the first line of his obituary, it mentions his understanding of the human condition. I found myself in the Philip Seymour Hoffman research feeling like this guy in art and as an actor understands the human condition as well as anybody. There's something so well embodied in him about a struggle that represents all of us.
I think he was fiercely intelligent. I think a lot of actors are, actually, by the way, and that's not to sort of big up, my brethren.
Yeah.
But he was also an overthinker. I think, again, in a lot of the research I've been doing, he was able to see as many sides as possible in anything or anyone, in a relationship, in anything. But, it's very difficult to switch off the overthinking. And as a result, the need and the desire to escape from thought, from thinking, from understanding is maybe one of the holes that he was left with into which his addictive qualities moved.
You don't drink?
No, I don't.
In fact, you went into rehab at a fairly early age.
That's what I thought. I did. I went, I got sober, I was 22 years old.
So this was drugs or alcohol or both?
Yes, all that stuff. Yeah. There's anything I can get my hands on. Yeah, I liked it all. Yeah.
And why did you decide to stop?
You get panicked. It was, I was 22 and I got panicked for my life. It really was. It was just that. I don't want to sound too dramatic and I don't want to make more out of it than it was, but I definitely was, whatever I was doing made me worry if I was going to be able to do the things I wanted to do with my life.
All right, what do you have for number 3? Number 3 thing you love about Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Well, I think it's that he did fulfill his promise. Mm-hmm. We've referred earlier to the burden that Seymour Hoffman put on himself. But one of the other things, of course, is that once you achieve a level of notoriety or, let's say, greatness, that can be a burden in itself. It's one thing, for instance, if you're an athlete to win the gold medal. It's another if you're a soccer team or football team to win a title. It's another to win it the next season. It's another to get a gold at the next Olympics. It's quite the thing to stay up there. It's one thing to get there, which is hard enough.
Yeah.
It's another to remain there. And his inexhaustible search for greatness kept him there and would only have kept him there had he lived and had he gone on. So I think he did fulfill his promise. But I really believe, and this is part of the loss and the grieving that so many of us still feel, and I think will always feel. And I still think, despite fulfilling his promise, maybe the best was still to come, which is an incredible thing to say about Philip Seymour Hoffman. But anyway, I really admire that.
Yeah. And I look, in terms of what our show is about, we talk about the upward staircase. And I think like an idea in there also is like reaching one's potential. And while he died young, and while he died prematurely, and while there, were undoubtedly in another world great things to come, a lot of people don't ever fulfill their potential. And there is something really desirable in that about him. So I love that.
Just as one other thing, actually.
Yeah,
quickly.
please.
His partner, Mimi O'Donnell, actually wrote a piece for Vogue. And yeah, it was a really well-written piece. I have to say, she's a terrific writer. And she said that there came a time where she seemed to recognize in her partner, her life partner and the father of her 3 kids, that Philip Seymour Hoffman knew he wasn't going to lead a long life, and that he knew he had to cram as much into whatever years he was going to have with us all. And she started to recognize that and see that. It obviously tragically came to pass that was true.
Yeah.
He was able to achieve so much within, 46 years.
That's interesting. It's a really great segue into my thing number 4, because it's very related. I heard him say, almost in an offhanded way in a conversation, that his love of sports. He, at a young age, when he was a teenager, was really into wrestling and baseball. He suffered an injury that his mother ended up encouraging him to go into acting, and then found his life pursuit, and the rest is sort of history. But the thing I wanted to point out was there is something like what you were just speaking to in terms of fulfilling greatness. There's clearly a self-competitive element in his psyche. And you see a similar sort of display in next-level athletes and great athletes. Michael Jordan comes to mind. Philip Seymour Hoffman said as much in an interview.
I think they're the same. What it takes to be a great athlete is the same thing what it takes to be a great actor, I think. That kind of concentration and that kind of privacy in public and that kind of unself-conscious kind of experience are very similar, and that kind of pressure of the people watching and finding privacy in front of all that stuff. So, I find it very similar.
Like, he draws this parallel between what great athletes do and what great actors do. That's not about the entertainment industry so much as it is about the striving for greatness.
Yeah. I mean, as a visual, I literally see an exploding volcano. I think it was a rage within him almost.
Yeah.
I think he was obsessively competitive.
But I think it's competition within, right? I don't think he's like trying to beat out other actors necessarily. Maybe that showed up sometimes, and I'm sure his ego, and temper flared wherever. But I really felt like he understood that to be a war within himself, not a war with the world necessarily.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's you're right, Michael, to make that distinction. It was all internal. It's one of the reasons why he's so incredible to watch, because so much of his acting, so much of how he's connecting with us stems from everything he's doing internally within himself as the character.
Yeah. Okay. For number 5, this is something that you and I talked about ahead of time, because we both kind of came to this. For thing number 5, his dedication to remaining mysterious. He was really, really careful around how much he talked about his personal life and his family. Saw this in a few different places. One, there's a quote where he says, "I'd rather not talk about it because my family doesn't have any choice. If I talk about them in the press, I'm giving them no choice, so I choose not to." But I also saw him say, "The less you know about me, the more interesting my work is." I think it's a real hard line to, one, identify, because I think it's hard to have a clear-eyed view on just how famous or well-known you are. And his trajectory into fame was in some ways gradual. I mean, there are key parts that I think we could talk about that move him into a new category, but somewhere along that line, he had pretty good self-awareness that if I'm going to be a great actor, you need to not know too much about me, even though it is me that I'm bringing to all these parts. So there was something around the protection of privacy that I found really admirable and desirable, because there was a kind of like sanctity of self in there. And I think he did that on behalf of his family. I also think he did that on behalf of his art.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to get the balance right when you're an A-lister, and when you're an A-lister that's so enigmatic that the public and the media really do want to know and feel like they need to know more about you. I think he got the balance right, and so many actors don't. The audience has more of a chance of believing who you are in that particular film or that particular play. You're more of a blank canvas because you haven't told them everything about your life, onto which they can project what they want to project. And I think the final thing on that is that I think Philip Seymour Hoffman on many occasions said that one of the things he missed most keenly was anonymity.
you're born with the right of anonymity. You know what I mean? You're just born into it. It's something that you're just anonymous. People who have just never had that change in their life don't think about it, don't even question it, it just is. But when that changes, it's a huge one. And it might be the artistic side of you that's fighting against that wants that privacy, so you can still exist in the world and feel safe to, express what you want to express. But it's fighting against the idea that your privacy or who you are is not your own anymore in some way.
Let's recap real quick. So, number 1, you said originality. Number 2, I said humility. Number 3, you said fulfilled his promise. Number 4, I said sports and self-competitiveness. And number 5, together we said dedication to remaining mysterious and protecting a sense of self with privacy. That is one hell of a list. Let's take a quick break for advertisements.
Michael, I got to tell you about this place. There is a bookstore I discovered, and they have prices on the books. They, in fact, named the store Half Price Books.
Are you talking about half price books?
Yeah, Half Price Books.
No, it's not half price book. It's half.
It should be
price
books half price.
It's half. HALF. Half price books.
Oh, as in one half.
Correct. Yeah. Half.
No, but I want full books.
Oh, no. You get the full book, and you get it at a fantastic price. That's why they call it half price books.
Well, I think I have to go there now.
I think you do have to go there now.
Let's start by checking out the all-new hpb.com, where we can find our local store, plan our next trip, buy online, pick up in store, create our own wish list, and more.
hpb.com. Okay, the next category we're going to do is family life. I think one of the reasons you and I decided to do this category is that I think people are just curious, and there's not a lot of information out there. But there are 2 important data points that I think are worth talking about. One is he was essentially raised by a single mother. And there is a very moving moment when he accepts the Academy Award for Capote, where he thanks his mother. And I watched it the other day. It brings me to tears.
She took me to my first play, and she stayed up with me and watched the NCAA Final Four. And her passions became my passions. And, be proud, Mom, because I'm proud of you, and we're here tonight. And it's so good. Thank you.
His parents split when he was around 10. His mother, at age 37, decides that she's going to go back to law school, and she eventually ends up becoming a judge. She runs for office, and he even campaigned for her. The other bit of information is he did have a life partner. We've made reference to her a few times, Mimi O'Donnell. They have 3 children, which, of course, is very tragic given his young death. And when he talks about his kids, he sounds like a very involved father. They never married, though. So I guess the thing I really want to talk about with you is the marriage thing. And I think the reason it's interesting is because there is all of this pressure in society to find your soulmate. And that is codified with a ring on your finger and standing before a God you may or may not believe in and saying, I do. I really like these examples, and I don't think we've done anybody else on the show, where somebody had really what looked like a life partner, and it has all of the qualities of what a marriage is, but they're not actually married. I kind of love that about him in a way, but I don't know. I mean, what's your take on this? What does it tell you, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I think it tells me that maybe, I don't know, this is just off the top of my head, I think maybe the character of being a husband, I know which parts of that I want to play, and I know which parts of that I don't want to. So you know what? The part of a husband, in terms of being loving and caring and generous and all the good things you should be to your partner or wife. As a father, I'm going to be in there, committed. I think they both agreed very early on that the family shouldn't be apart for any more than 2 weeks at any one time. And I think they kept to that.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. And he was insistent about that. I mean, he'd drag him to, frickin' Winnipeg or wherever he was on. Like, it's like, we need to be together.
So I think there were certain parts of the husband character that he was, that he got behind and was maybe even more committed to than most people, especially in an industry where you're moving around a lot.
You referenced it earlier, that piece that his partner, Mimi, wrote for Vogue in 2017 or so, years after he died. I mean, like, everywhere you see them talk about each other, love is unmistakable. And to go back to like his upbringing and his parents getting divorced, I mean, one thing that I think you and I agree on, there's no information that I saw in his biography that unlocks this guy. He remains mysterious to me. He remains both really relatable and also fundamentally unknowable. I think some of this biographical information begins to help us understand it, but I think most of the reason he is so confounding has to do with his addiction and the disease of addiction that he suffered from. And I thought Mimi captured this well in that Vogue article. His addiction was bigger than him. And there was no love. There was no family component that was going to be strong enough or big enough to overcome that. And that's a hard message. And I think it's a truth for a lot of families that suffer with somebody who is an addict. I guess all of this is to say, I saw in this guy an unbelievable amount of love for his family, his mother, his partner, and his children. And I don't think that the fact that he ended up dying prematurely from an overdose can or should diminish that. But it's also really hard to talk about that because there is this very natural tendency to say, then why didn't he live?
I find it, if I'm really honest with you, Michael, I find it in some areas, maybe to do with the art and stuff, I find it very easy to talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman. Still challenging because he was so complex and so rich. His partner, Mimi, obviously is still here. And, he has family and friends and people that knew him. And I never did, sadly. And
even if we feel like we did.
Even if we feel like we did. So, and of course, with his addiction, again, in that terrific article, his partner Mimi said that it took her a long time. Even she didn't realize until very later on. It was always close to the surface, and she didn't realize how close.
Yeah, and I think it's a good segue to the next category, Control Z. This is where we look for the big do-overs, the things you might have done differently, potential regrets. So at some point in around 2012, and I read one article that said it was at a wrap party for the master, decides to take a drink again after a couple of decades of sobriety. You and I were talking about this beforehand. I haven't talked much about this on the show, and I want to be a little careful about how I do, but I'm a recovery guy. I've got 10 years of sobriety, and I'm somebody who, goes to groups and tries to stay involved in participating. I bring it up because I'm hopeful, Michael, that I can say something that might be helpful to somebody else. I do think that all other things being equal, you look at somebody like Philip Seymour Hoffman, and he's got so much going for him in life and art and family. And like, why would it ever make sense for this guy to say, I think I'm ready to drink again, when he knows himself to be an addict and alcoholic?
What was rehab like?
It's a lot of things. It is a lot of things, but I wouldn't really get into too much, but
it changed you.
It did, yeah, it did. Meaning it was a respite, it was a break, it was something about it that I remember. It so drastically pulled me out of my life. If someone came and just grabbed me out, put me over there, and forced me to deal with a bunch of people that I have not dealt with since, and create intimate bonds and relationships with those people. And it did change something. It made me see things differently. It gave me this idea that those things you want to do, Phil, those things you want to get done, you can do them.
There's not one thing you can point to that helps explain the cunning, baffling, and powerful nature of addiction such that one day you wake up and say, I'm ready to try drinking again. I do think it sneaks up on you. Definitely imagine, though, that one of the things that is very, very important for sustained recovery is connection with others, is fellowship, is feeling like you can walk into a room, share about your problem, and feel connected to other people in that room and feel humbled and not feel alone. I have to imagine, I think this happens a lot with celebrities, as their fame grows, as their anonymity fades, that the ability to go back to shared experience and commonality with others, like that's harder and harder to sustain. I think that must have been harder and harder for him to sustain. And it sounded like in some of what Mimi had to share, that happened with him. I can't know, none of us can know what led him to say, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to try drinking a little bit. And then 2 years later, he's found in an apartment with a needle in his arm and, heroin, coke in his system and so forth. But I do think this thing sneaks up on you.
That's really, really interesting stuff, actually. There's so many things, as we said, we cannot know. It's very interesting what you talk about in terms of fame and how fame can distance an actor from the people in their lives, from people generally, from themselves.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of stuff around that. But I just wonder. It's just my opinion that I think was becoming more important to him towards the end of his life, and therefore I think may have a high or reasonable degree of relevancy to his life coming to an end so prematurely and so tragically, is that if you're an artist like Philip Seymour Hoffman and it is about greatness and doing whatever it takes to get there, in other words, there's this very, very specific, highly demanding outcome in play here, which is I will do whatever it takes. I will achieve greatness with this role and all the burdensome stuff that goes with that. It's very much outcome driven. And I think I can only imagine if you're a father, again, so much of your life has to be outcome driven. We've touched on, we're not apart from each other as a family for more than 2 weeks. He had a really, for him, a defining or much better understanding of what love is, which is a pretty big thing in any human's life. But I just wonder at the end, Michael, whether he went, too much outcome, whether that's art or my family and my children, just too much. I need some release. The best I can come up with is that there's something about outcome surrounding him at the end of his life that led to his life ending as early as it did and the way it did. That's the best I can come up with, I think, at the moment.
What's the hardest thing you ever had to let go of?
Outcome, any plan, because it's when I think any plan I thought I had about where my life was going to go, I've had to let go of.
And maybe none of us will ever know, Mike.
We won't. We won't. But I'll say, to your point about love, you got me thinking about one other thing I wanted to say about sobriety and recovery. One thing that I've seen is a lot of people get really hung up on the idea of the solution to addiction being spiritual, not religious. And I think that distinction between spiritual and religious is fundamental. But a lot of people get tangled up in and lost in that. And this comes up for me a lot. The people I know in recovery, they have a really wide and frankly open understanding of higher power. Right. Sometimes it is rooted in religion, but there's no shortage of Buddhists and atheists and agnostics and people who are living really deeply spiritual lives. I would imagine if you're somebody of his empathetic powers and his success, who's experienced the outcomes, that like, what does spirituality, however you define it, look like for somebody like that? There is a part of me that does believe that pursuit got away from him. I don't think it's about finding God. I think it's about the willingness to look. And I think one thing that's confusing about Philip Seymour Hoffman is that I do see him as a searcher, but I do see him also maybe a little bit exhausted by that search. And that's something along his spiritual path. Something got thrown off, and somewhere that idea got lost for him.
Which is interesting, because I kid you not, I was about to say that it was Tennessee Williams' birthday this week and created a little meme from a quote, and it's a great quote. And it occurred to me yesterday that, it really might be applicable to Philip Seymour Hoffman. But Tennessee Williams once said, why did I write? Because I found life unsatisfactory. And I think there's either some or a lot of that playing around all the time throughout Philip Seymour Hoffman's life. No idea. What specific moment triggered that? No idea. And maybe, it doesn't even matter. The fact is, we all find parts of life unsatisfactory, but I think when you're an artist, when you're working at exalted levels, when you can't switch off thinking and feeling and suffering or whatever, if you're one of those sorts of people, you find life unsatisfactory, that's a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
That's a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
That's like, well, there's no God to save me from this.
I do think it is, and this is why the sort of whole higher power idea is both important and confounding, because there is no answer to that, but it is also the thing that saves you. And I just think that's what this whole human condition question is all about. And that's why it's like we're not going to land on anything satisfactory. To my mind, in coming away from like, what can I learn about this man? I personally had the experience of, I am reminded that the seeking is the thing I need to wake up every morning and do. If I'm looking, not finding, but if I'm looking, then I'll be okay.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at, man. I don't know. I don't know if that connects or what your thoughts on
It does. And I think what it connects to, maybe I'm becoming more convinced of this as we talk about it, but I think part of what faith and spirituality is about we want to know the outcome of this thing we call life. The sadness is there. It's there within me. It's there within you. It's there within so many others out there. What was still to come, that burns away inside of me. And, with incidences like this, people can also say, oh, God, how selfish was this guy? Didn't he care enough about himself or his wife, or his partner or his kids or his siblings?
And that's just not the logic you can apply.
Yeah, I don't. If you want to, great, apply
but it's tempting. It's tempting. And that's sort of, I think, the point is that it's tempting. Okay, let's move on. Cocktail, coffee, or cannabis? This is where we ask which one would we most want to do with our dead celebrity. This may be a question of what drug sounds like the most fun to partake with this person, or another philosophy is that a particular kind of drug might allow access to a part of them we are most curious about. Given what we just talked about in terms of drugs and recovery, we do approach this category with like, let's set aside any addiction. There is a part of me that wants to have a drink with him and get into the good, honest, like sort of depths of humanity and complexity kind of conversation. I think even despite all that, I'd like to have a cup of coffee with Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I don't even know exactly what I want to talk about, although I am actually very curious about his own taste. He, honestly, like you, Michael, has exceptional taste, I think. And one thing I really enjoy about you is what a good job you do of reminding me of how much great art is out there and drawing my attention to moments that I might have forgotten about. I'd like to have a similar kind of conversation with Philip Seymour Hoffman. I'd like to sit down, on a fall afternoon next to Central Park or something, maybe in the West Village, who knows, where we sit down and just talk about art. Talk about movies, talk about like who he sees as other great actors, what he sees in them as greatness. For all the interviews I watched with him, I didn't hear quite enough about that. And I have real curiosity because he's got such aptitudes for acting. I want to know more about his taste. So that's my answer for coffee, cocktail, cannabis. What'd you go? What do you think? What do you want to do?
Interesting. So we're going for coffee, and that's one of life's greatest pleasures for me, going for coffee with a friend.
Yeah.
I like one-on-ones. I don't like groups of 2, 3, or 25. I like one-on-one. Let's fucking drill down. Let's talk turkey. Let's just get on the level here, reveal ourselves, and open up.
What do you imagine talking to him about? Well, how does that, if you just play with a thought experiment, where would that conversation go?
Well, actually, I tell you what I would have asked him is this, and this is kind of, some people will say this is really a stupid thing to say, but as is a hypothetical and presuming that he trusted me, I would honestly want to ask him, dude, what are your holes and why do you have the holes that you have? I just really want to know, because I think they can help me understand so many other things about you. In other words, what shape and size is your uncomfortability? Now that's heavy. That's, I mean, and it would have.
Yeah, you got to ease into that conversation.
Oh man, it's not the first thing you say, is it? For God's sake, it's hey man, I love you. You're fantastic, and you're great. And how's your coffee? And
no, but it's what you'd want to get at. I mean, we were talking about recovery a second ago. They talk about this in the rooms. God-sized hole. God-sized hole. That's sort of literal in some ways. There's no drug. There's no experience. There's no woman, man. There's no person that fits. I think in some ways the question is like gratitude. Like what brings you joy and what gets at that experience of love and gratitude? Because that's ultimately the same thing as the God idea. Maybe.
I think by the way, and this is maybe slightly egoic, but I think I'd stand a reasonable chance of getting some kind of answer out of him were he capable. Because when I meet up with people, it really is for the most part one-on-ones, because that's how you get a proper conversation going.
Sure.
And people seem to trust me, and they're right to trust me. And I like to think that he would have, got from what I was saying, what I wasn't saying, from my energy, that he could trust me and that he would have told me. Because, Jesus God, if I've got Philip Seymour Hoffman in front of me, one of the most enigmatic artists ever in terms of acting and film acting especially, can you give me some kind of rough guide to what makes you you in any kind of regard? I just want to understand you a little bit better, because in doing that, and maybe this is ultimately selfish, I don't know, it's rotten of me, but by doing that, I'll understand why I feel what I feel about you. And I think that's a really interesting thing with those of us who love Philip Seymour Hoffman. I want to know why I feel what I feel.
No, it's a mystery in me. It's a mystery in me. It's a mystery in you. I feel the same way. There is something relatable, compelling, enviable, scary, but there is something that I don't understand my reaction to you and your art, that I felt like if I knew that a little bit better, I'd know me better. And that's kind of the point,
Yeah. Well, that's also the point of an actor. We are meant to hold up a mirror to the world. It's like, hey, this is us. This might be you. This might be a bit of you. And if I've got them there in front of me with a cappuccino,
that's what I'm going for.
Like,
fucking A.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, we've arrived. The final category, the Vanderbeek, named after James Vanderbeek, who famously said in Varsity Blues,
I don't want your life.
Based on the conversation we have, do you want this life? This is always hard with a young death and an unexpected death, and I want to try and remove that or zero that out. Because something you said in 5 Things about fulfilling his promise, reaching his potential, has really stuck with me as we've been talking about it. Certainly as you've been talking about legacy. If you're given 46 years on this planet, that does feel like a young death, and it's truncated, and that's awful. On the other hand, there is a depth and richness to what he did with his 46 years. What are your thoughts?
Firstly, we have an obsession, in my opinion, with being on this planet for as long as we can. So what is 46 years? Is that midlife? Is that a short life? He was tragically young in terms of this human being and their capabilities and their talents and genius levels, and what more they had to give us that could have informed and educated and entertained and enlightened us about ourselves. Yes, I think in that sense it was tragically young, but I think I would love to have lived his life. You were open and honest earlier about recovery and stuff. I'll tell you this, I still am yet to understand and feel unconditional love. That goes to my family, my ex, yada, yada, yada. I'm still yet to feel that. Philip Seymour Hoffman had that. He had that with Mimi. So he totally understood, I think, before he died, and totally experienced what love is. Artistically, I think he fulfilled his promise to himself as well as to us in the audience. So I think he experienced things as an artist, as a creative, and therefore as a human being. I look at what he achieved in his life as an actor, and I just go, wow, to have lived that and experienced that, no matter the burden, no matter how difficult, no matter that it kept him awake at night, even with all of that, I would have wanted his life. That was a special life. And that's where I am on it, I tell you.
Yeah. No, yeah. I look, you make a very compelling case. I want to pick up on this idea of love, because we talked a lot about outcome. As the conversation's gone on, I've been thinking about, what do we mean by outcome? Outcome may be how a relationship plays out or how our lives play out, but I think a lot of it is tied in with our creativity. It's our creative output, right? And when you look at Philip Seymour Hoffman and you see creative greatness, as you said at the top of the episode, like thoroughly original, this like umbilical cord of empathy that he is able to bring you into all these characters, good, bad, evil, weird, creepy sometimes, but you are along for the ride. Like, that is his creative output, right? That's what he did in this life. I'm thinking now, how does that relate to this question of the ability to give and receive love? I think that that's a really complicated question. I never quite looked at it this way before, but part of what we are doing in our lives when we put ourselves out there creatively is trying to express a need for love. Is that part of your answer? Is it about giving love or receiving love or something like that?
I tell you, one of the things that can be the case with a lot of actors, I'm pretty certain it's the case with me. How do I put it? The things in terms of love, the things in terms of emotions and feelings that I either can't express or have huge difficulty expressing in real life, art's the outlet. Creativity is where I can find the outcome. Philip Seymour Hoffman spoke in an interview once about his kids, and he was talking about how he watched them play and how much joy he got from that as an observer, as their father. He then spoke about the moment when they're playing where they let their dad in and he would join in and become part of whatever they were doing.
I love them unconditionally. I can safely say that. But I do say, in the moment of where they're enjoying each other and they let me enjoy them, there are moments when something else creeps in there. Mm-hmm. And I'm not conscious of the love. I'm conscious of something else, which happens to be my own childhood. So like when they're loving each other and they let me enjoy them, all of a sudden it's almost like they're taking me back. And I'm going, oh God, it's so good to be young and enjoying each other. Having a kid always takes you back to being a kid somehow. And they really are showing me a childhood I might not have had in some way.
Right.
And I think that's what happens
good
with
to
kids.
Go back like
and
that,
it feels good, meaning it does feel. So it is love, but it's also something else. I mean, love encompasses all those things I'm talking about. But if something else creeps in with the children, it becomes a different kind of reflection, which is of your shortcomings, your inadequacies, your incapabilities, your powerlessness, and on and on and on, which wakens up a whole other thing.
That kind of made me think, in real life, we're great at observing, we're great at deducing things that we can use in our art, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we are able to use those things in real life, in everyday life. There is a division, a split between our creative, imagined selves and our real selves.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought about it like this, but what you're describing there is a sort of interesting metaphor between performance and audience, right? You watch kids play, and children are great at simplifying the experience of being human. And to hear him describe that, I mean, he moves from being in the audience to sort of being a participant. I mean, let's not forget who we're talking about here, right? We're talking about somebody who seemed to bring that division, that separation, as close to the blurry line between audience and performer as possible. So it's an interesting moment to draw attention to, because I do think it's like, okay, how do I experience love then? Is it as an observer, as a participant, and where am I in all this? And I think that question is hugely important when it comes to Philip Seymour Hoffman, because part of what this hole that's inside of him is a God-sized hole that you want to fill with love somehow. And how does he do that as a father? How does he do that as an actor?
I had a teacher at drama school, a fantastic guy who taught the likes of Danny Day-Lewis and all sorts of people. And he used to say in his thick sort of Prussian accent, he used to say, all right, so you must watch children play. You must watch them play because they play for the sake of playing. And it was true. That's what children do. They just play for the sake of playing. Now, now, that's very difficult to do, and we lose that, obviously, as we grow older. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman played his entire life. But I think he did it through his art. I don't think he did it as much as he wanted to. He just couldn't in real life.
And so despite all that, you're still a yes.
Oh, massively. His life was rich, and it was intense, and it was bold and courageous. A really great life should be as dichotomous and eclectic as possible. This guy had his troubles and travails, and some of them on an epic scale, but he didn't have boring. His life truly was a life lived, as every life should be, but fundamentally and for the most part isn't. So would I want a life like that? You bet I would.
Yeah.
What about you? Would you want Philip Seymour Hoffman's life?
It's a really, really hard one. You look at the young death, and I said, zero that out. I think I want to try and bring in the framing of the upward staircase that we talk about on this show. Because let's say that Philip Seymour Hoffman had not OD'd. Let's say that he had died in a plane crash. I would have said, this man climbed the upward staircase. Does the nature of his death and the fact that you could call it a death of despair, does it change my interpretation? It does, and it's hard not to. As somebody in recovery and somebody who thinks about the God-sized hole and the role of higher power and all that, I have a very, very hard time removing that. There's a part of me that looks at this life and sees, let's just say on the upward staircase, there's 100 stairs. I feel like this man raced to the 9th floor really quickly and hung out on the 9th floor for many decades. I feel like his rocket ship of experience and creative output and of an ability to receive love and give it was of an order of magnitude that very few people ever reach. There's something to me very hard about the fact that he gets to a place where drugs and alcohol, again, makes sense to him. What I really wish I saw in this life was a second chapter. I don't mean necessarily more movies or more roles on Broadway, although it could have been that. It's more that I want to see that there are still stairs to be climbed, that there are still new heights to be reached, and that the disease doesn't win out. And that's not what happened here. I really try to not look at the nature of how someone died on this show. In this case, it's a little too front and center for me to ignore. So while I take everything that you said to heart, and I love what you had to say about watching children play and what the experience of love looks like there, I think I'm a no. I don't want your life, Philip Seymour Hoffman. So I think that's where I'm at.
Very hard. It's very hard.
Let me say this. So, you're a yes, I'm a no. And on the subject of love and how we receive love and friendship, I think if you're a creative like what you and I both are, some of how we experience love is through how people react to our art, our creative output. And when we do that, your ass is on the line, your ego's on the line. That's what made Philip Seymour Hoffman courageous. But I also want to say, I'm really glad you and I have become friends, man. And when I was drunk, I used to be an I love you, man kind of guy. Our friendship has become one of the things that is just such a surprise at this stage of my life. And I really appreciate you making time for this conversation and for making time for me.
It really is, and you really are a pleasure in my life, bro. As soon as I can, I'll be getting on a plane and hightailing my hairy British ass over to America. And I'm going to hang out with you, and I cannot wait for that. And I also love something as stupid and daft and idiotic as social media. Yeah. And that particular platform has brought you and I together. Yeah. It can happen. There aren't many of them, but
There are not many of them. Mostly destroying our humanity, but yeah.
But Osborne, you're one of them.
Thanks, man. It means a lot to hear you say that.
Michael Osborne, you're Philip Seymour Hoffman. You're at the pearly gates. St. Peter is there. What do you say?
I'm going to try and make this short and sweet. I guess on some level, this is maybe more of a Buddhist idea, but I do think that we're all suffering. But inside all of us is a raging volcano of emotion and confusion and fear and love. My job, as I understood it, was to show just what a universal experience that is for everybody. I did that through the parts I played, and I went as far as I could go to stay present, to make that pretend exercise truthful and authentic. And I think in so doing, I provided some sense of comfort, however temporary, to audiences around the world and for a generation. I think that's what I was put on this earth to do, and I hope for that you'll let me in. Thanks again to Michael Warburton for that conversation. If you're interested in supporting Michael Warburton, which I highly recommend you do, you can do so on the platform Ko-fi, that is Ko-Fi. I'll link to it in the show notes. Michael Warburton spends a lot of his time posting things on social media, and this is a way to support somebody who overall is trying to amplify the arts and to be something of a pop culture historian. So we're really big fans at Famous and Gravy, and we encourage you to support him there. Famous and Gravy listeners, we want to hear from you. We need people to participate in our opening quiz where we reveal the dead celebrity. You can email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. If you're enjoying our show, please tell your friends. You can find us on Twitter, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Threads. Our handle is @famousandgravy. We also have a newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website, famousandgravy.com. Famous and Gravy was created by Amit Kapoor and me, Michael Osborne. This episode was produced by Megan Palmer. Original theme music by Kevin Strang. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.